I'm Barbara Evans. I'm Professor of Public Health Engineering at the University of Leeds, and I'm also part of the SFD Promotion Initiative. And at Leeds we're really taking the lead on some of the technical tools as part of the promotion initiative. The SFD, or the set of tools which comprise an SFD, are essentially a means to enter into a conversation at a city level about what are your primary sanitation problems, I suppose you would say. So the SFD, the actual diagram itself, is to some extent is a product of a process, and its purpose is really to try and get people to focus on what are the major problems that we have here. It arises out of historically a sort of tendency for many cities, many technical people, many funders and many donors to think about urban sanitation as a sewerage and wastewater problem. And the SFD was an attempt to enable you to have the conversation at the city level which said it's not just that, it's a more complex set of processes and interactions, and altogether that's creating a problem, and let's understand that. In the end, at the end of the process, you would normally expect to have a diagram which essentially shows you where all of the excreta in a city is flowing. So it helps you to understand whether where it's flowing and whether it flows in a way which is safely managed or unsafely managed. So it helps you to understand where your primary health hazards, if you like, are likely to be coming from. So the diagram is almost like a hazard map. It tells you whether your biggest problem is poorly managed on-site sanitation or leaking sewers or a failing treatment plant, for example. But taken all together, it's accompanied by a narrative report which helps you to understand the basis on which you made that assessment, but also the enabling environment, the kind of features of the city which are giving you that result. Because sometimes, you know, if you just drew a diagram, you might think that the solution would have to be just a technical solution. Oh, we have leaking sewers, we need to fix the sewers. But what the report does as it sits beside the diagram is it helps you to understand, well, really what we have here is a budgeting problem or a capacity problem or a policy problem. And the one very, very unique and specific thing that the SFD did was, you know, there had been enabling environment assessment tools previously. But what we tried to do was to say you need to understand that enabling environment in the context of every step of the sanitation value chain. So you may have a policy for household toilets, you may have a policy for wastewater treatment, but maybe you don't have any policy or budget or capacity for emptying toilets or maintaining sewers or anything that comes in the middle. So it's really a way of forcing a city to sort of address its whole service chain and look at the failings and then also look at the outcomes. So the diagram can't really be, or you have to treat it very carefully when it's by itself. What it is a product of an analysis. It's based on a lot of assumptions. It's based on a lot of estimates of what's really happening in systems where we don't always necessarily have very detailed technical data. And similarly, it's not something which arises spontaneously from sort of laissez-faire. It arises as a result of the institutional context in which that city is functioning. So I would say I would always be quite cautious of dealing with the diagram by itself. It's quite useful if you just want to rapidly gain the attention of a policymaker, but as soon as you want to go even a step beyond that, you need to go back to the underlying material, the assessment of capacity. A really critical thing, for example, is that you might look at the diagram and think, well, we've got to make a massive investment. But we would say, well, no, please don't do that, because you've got to understand what's the potential for public finance at the local level that could support an investment of that type, even if there could be, you know, external funding. So I would be very wary of ever suggesting that the diagram works on its own. Very occasionally it's useful for sort of triggering a policy discussion. But as soon as you go beyond that, as I say, you need to read it with its accompanying background data. So one of the questions that we get asked a lot is, can we use this tool for planning? Can we use it for technical design? And the answer is no. What the tool really is, I see it as, if you think about the sort of typical planning process as being a kind of problem identification, pre-feasibility, feasibility, design, implementation, management, you're really at the point of problem identification, possibly pre-feasibility a little bit. But as soon as you want to go to the point of saying, well, actually, what types of systems are we going to design? What types of investments are we going to make? Can we afford to operate those? You really then need to move into a much better resourced sort of context. So I would always say that the tool is like the way of setting the planning process in its right path. But then you still have to go through normal, there is no substitute for fundamental good planning, including a consideration of institutional factors, social factors, financial factors. So I would always say it's like the first step, maybe the first 2 steps, but it can't take you much further. So we did this work, I think we started in 2012. We did a report for the World Bank Water and Sanitation Programme in 2013. We published a couple of journal papers essentially outlining our method and presenting our results. And the World Bank have also published a couple of our reports based on the analysis that we did of those 12 cities. And it's one of those funny things that it's not rocket science. It's not a particularly groundbreaking thing. As I said, it draws on previous work for sure. But there seemed to be a moment, suddenly people were really, oh yes, okay, so now we can see the nature of the problem that we're trying to address. So there's tremendous interest. I think the actual graphical representation that we developed for the ship flow diagrams, which was very much, it was a team effort, but I would say Peter Hawkins at WSP was very influential in coming up with that graphic, had a tremendous effect on people. It was suddenly seemed possible to talk to mayors and talk to senior policymakers and say, look, this is the nature of your problem. 80% of your excreta is in the local drainage network, or 20% of your excreta is in the domestic environment. So it's really taken off, I think, as an idea. And what's really nice now is lots and lots of people are taking it and running with it and developing it and using it for different purposes. So it's sort of like the perfect project for me in a way. It's like we've not through doing something that, it's almost like by synthesizing a set of ideas but coming up with perhaps a way of pulling it all together, we've been able to create a catalyst for a lot of new thinking and a lot of new interest in urban sanitation, and I'm really delighted. One of the things I would also say about that is that it's it means that a lot of people who are now interested in urban sanitation understand the systems nature of urban sanitation. And that's been a problem for a long time. People often think of sanitation as just toilets or just a particular part of the chain. And of course, our analysis is really strongly focused on the idea that you have to take the excreta and it's got to arrive at a point where it's safely managed, appropriately disposed, and that may involve transporting it, moving it, treating it, physically emptying pit latrines, all of those things, and trying to make sure that people are really thinking about that complex chain, which I think is happening. It's very exciting.